Kyle, Mohan Racing. We're out here in Seattle, Formula Drift. We're working on our alignment for this track. Something I get asked quite often is what alignment settings do I prefer, or how do I set up the alignment on my Formula Drift car? And I even get criticism because people go, Kyle, you're not letting us know what your alignment is. And I think some people think it's secret information. And I mean, yeah, there's definitely a little bit of secretiveness in the pits at Formula Drift Pro events. But generally, other than really like fine details, the alignment settings change at every round. So when somebody asks me, hey, what alignment settings are you running? I really don't have a good answer. So what we're gonna do in this video is break down some basics of what I look for and like to run at any track, but maybe not the exact specifics per an individual track. So obviously with Formula Drift cars, specific to Formula Drift, they have a fair amount of suspension travel. Now, if you're familiar with D1 drifting or other styles of drifting, the cars may sit a little lower, which means you have less suspension travel. Now, this is important because when you're setting up your rear alignment, how the suspension moves as the car squats down under the load of acceleration will change suspension geometry. So with the 5-link rear, whether it's Wisefab, Mazda, or some iteration of it, what I like to have is a stable toe setting, slightly toed in to aggressively toed in, depending on the track. So that way my toe is not changing under load change, but I have a specific amount of toe-in traction set for whatever tire I'm running, whatever track I'm running, and whatever condition I'm running. And that can range anywhere from 1/8 of an inch up to 1 inch of toe. And that sounds crazy, but Formula Drift is pretty crazy. Now, my crew guy's working on the alignment right now, so I gotta stay out of his way. Now, in regards to your camber, same thing. Factory suspension, different iterations of Mazda 5-link suspensions can move different way under loading, but with the Wisefab, we're also looking for not any type of significant camber changes, although in the RX8s, in most Mazdas, in most cars, as you go from a droop to a compression, you're generally gonna go from a camber out at droop to a camber in at compression. And it's really important that your wear under your acceleration, under drift, under load, whether it be road racing or drifting or drag racing, you get a flat contact patch. So right now we're working on setting the suspension up, and if you notice, it's got quite a bit of positive camber, and that's because under load the suspension's going to squat down. We've already got our toe set, but it's going to camber in and flatten out. And I mentioned Formula Drift and ride height change because we run softer springs like rally cars or, you know, different forms of race cars. So a lot of the times when you see a Formula Drift car sitting in the pits, it probably has a little bit of fender gap. That's because once it's under motion, the car is going to squat down and transfer that load. So just to summarize, rear suspension on my Mazda RX8, I like to have toe in, and I'm looking for flat tire wear in drift depending on what the track is doing. So we can have staggered camber settings for banked tracks. Just kind of think about that. So that's one of the reasons why I never get into the fine details, because basically every track is going to have a different toe and camber setting, and that's also going to be relative to ride height and spring rate. But basically, drift car, you want some toe in and you want flat tire wear. I think a lot of people think that drifting is about not having traction, but it's actually the opposite. Everything we're trying to do with our suspension settings, the geometry, is to make traction, make dig, make load transfer happen while in drift and be as smooth as possible. All right, so moving up to the front, we're not working on the front right now, but easy things to look at. Always check your tire wear. You can see we're not rolling over too far. And one of the things to always think about is when you're drifting, your wheels are opposing angles. So if you're going right, you're actually steering left. And so what your geometry does in the front under Ackerman conditions, stagger conditions, and opposing angle conditions can really make a difference. So always look to see if you're laying over your inside or outside tire, and that can help you determine your camber settings. In this particular setup with WiseFab, there's not a lot of camber or Ackerman change as you go into or away from angle. And one of the things I like to have to help maintain drift speed is a front end that does not have a lot of Ackerman. So think of how a forklift steers, where the front tires stay very parallel together, versus a road race car where you have an inside and outside tire that roll at a different radius. So WiseFab takes care of the Ackerman. That's kind of on their setup. And as far as what a lot of people are concerned about as return, steering return, or you know, what's it called? I forget what it's called, but basically how the tire is going to return in your steering, it's actually built into trail. So they've moved the hub back, so essentially the steering feels like an OEM car returns, but it's just done a different way. When you come to toe and camber in the front, it's a little more straightforward. I like to run slightly toed out, but a very slight amount. We're talking about a 1/16 of an inch, because the more toe you run, depending on what your geometry is doing, the more scrub radius you can have. You're not trying to have a large scrub, you're trying to keep those tires in motion so you can travel as fast as possible. So generally just a slight amount of toe out to help with the initial feel of turn in and front end dive. And then as far as the camber settings go, I like to run a decent amount of front camber, and I think this really depends on the geometry of the car. RX8s, we're setting it anywhere from about 3.8 to 4 degrees, upwards of 6 to 8 degrees, depending on the track. We don't have a lot of front stagger in our suspension geometry or alignment settings, so the front end stays pretty basic most of the time. Slight toe out, decent amount of camber, make sure you're running on a decent amount of contact patch while in drift. And you know, if you're running OEM front suspension versus a drift oriented front suspension, then really the alignment settings will be very similar. You're just gonna have a lot more scrub because the OEM suspension has a lot more Ackerman built in for normal style driving situations. Sorry, I had to think about that. Hurts my brain. So there's a little bit of KMR information about suspension geometry, alignment settings. I hope that helps. Obviously this is a WiseFab car, but I think when it comes to RX8s, the fundamentals, whether it be my street car, my original track car, or any iteration of it, we've always had a slight toe out in the front, decent amount of camber, some range of toe in the back, and usually starting off with positive camber, so as it squats down, we're starting to camber in. And a big thing to note is OEM RX8 suspensions do toe in as they squat, but with the WiseFab suspension, we're able to eliminate that and set up basically a permanent toe setting. That's one of the reasons I like the WiseFab. All right, so KMR, a little bit of at track alignment tech talk while we're up here in Seattle. And because this is a bank track, we will be running a little bit of staggered tire pressure and rear alignment staggered settings. And you can probably figure that out in your brain based on which way the track is going. Make sure to have fun, keep that drifting up. We like the rotaries at KMR. Ask those questions. This video is because people have asked about alignment and suspension settings. So there you go, KMR. Follow us, click some links in the description below, and ask us what you want to see. I got to get back to work. I've been filming too long. 10-minute tech talk.